You won't believe the disturbing truth about these child lottery winners. Can you be too young to win the lottery? You're about to find out. Number 7. Callum Fitzpatrick. Callum Fitzpatrick from Northern Ireland became one of the youngest lottery winners in history back in October 2014. He was just 16 years old at the time, and his life looked pretty ordinary for a teenager. He was studying for his exams, working at his family's grocery store to earn some cash, and was passionate about playing soccer with his local team. But his perfectly normal life turned into something extraordinary overnight when he won 390,000 British pounds. That's almost $500,000. It's not the biggest win ever, but it's enough to totally change a 16-year-old's life forever. Callum told the press that he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with the money. He said he was thinking about buying a car when his next birthday rolled around, and he was finally old enough to own one. But he wasn't looking for anything flashy, just any old reliable car to get around in. He also wanted to buy tickets to watch his favorite soccer team play in their home stadium. It seemed like a very responsible way to spend his money. He went on to study civil engineering at university and probably used some of his lottery winnings to do it. He seemed like the perfect winner. But some people will tell you that winning the lottery can ruin your life in ways you never imagined. And in 2021, the world found out that Callum's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Tragically, his rugby team announced to the press that Callum's life had been cut short. He was only 24 years old. His family didn't reveal what happened to him, but his family did ask anyone who loved Callum to honor his death with a donation to a charity called the Public Initiative for the Prevention of Suicide and Self-Harm. That's a pretty strong indicator that Callum probably took his own life. Psychologists say loneliness and isolation are something a lot of lottery winners struggle with, even if they're surrounded by loving family and friends like Callum was. It proves that even child lottery winners can encounter the same problems, and sometimes that can lead to a real tragedy like this one. There are many ways a lottery win can go horribly wrong. The next winner on our list thought he could use his money to fix something terrible and found out that money can't buy everything. Number 6. Stuart Donnelly. Back in 1997, a 25 million British pound jackpot was won by 12 people at the same time. That's a pretty amazing story on its own, but we're only going to focus in on one of the lucky winners, 17-year-old Stuart Donnelly, who took home the equivalent of about $2.638 million. That's a lot of money for such a young boy to handle, and his spending quickly got out of hand. But he wasn't blowing it on drugs and fast cars. He was facing a tragedy, and he was desperately hoping his money would be able to fix it. He started by giving a big donation to the local hospital. It was generous, but there was also a good reason for it. That hospital was treating his younger brother for a rare and life-threatening genetic blood disorder. And that wasn't the only illness in the family. Stuart's dad was suffering from polio. He couldn't work, and that meant that Stuart's lottery win immediately became the family's primary source of income. Stuart didn't mind. He just wanted his family to be happy. He bought houses for his aunts and uncles, as well as his mom. He also bought a property in Thailand, which he hoped would be used as a holiday house by his whole family. He went there for his very first foreign holiday. He hoped life was looking up. Then he did something selfless. His parents were divorced, so Stuart decided he could keep his sick dad close. He bought a secluded cottage in the countryside for himself and told his dad to move in with him. He started taking care of his father and felt that this quiet home would be the perfect place for him to rest and recover. And for a while, it worked. But just 2 years after his big win, Stuart's dad died. That broke Stuart's heart. For a while, he shared the cottage with his best friend, but he and his family were feeling the pressure that came with his big lottery win. Stuart was getting a lot of unwanted attention, and he'd even find people camping outside his little house hoping for a share of the money. Soon, Stuart locked himself away and lived in silence in the secluded house all on his own for years. In January 2010, before Stewart's 30th birthday, his mom called him at his cottage and nobody answered. Worried, she asked his neighbor to check up on him. It was the neighbor who found Stewart's body. Days before he died, he'd visited a lawyer to finalize a will in case he died. He'd had a recent health scare, and some people think he was worried that if something happened to him, his family wouldn't get what they deserved. Amazingly, he still had $1.2 million. Nobody's sure exactly why he died. Some say it was an accidental overdose, some say he took his own life, and others think his health was worse than they realized. Either way, his life had ended in tragedy long before his own death. Stewart's story proves that sometimes no lottery win is big enough to really improve the life of the winner, but the next winner proves that money also doesn't help. Number 5. Leah Sumray. Leah Sumray from England was a 21-year-old waitress at a fish and chip shop in England. She was earning about $5.50 an hour at that job. One day, on her way home, she made a kinda crazy decision. She chose to spend more than a full hour's wages on scratch-off tickets. It seems like a really stupid thing to do, but this time it paid off. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the symbols that indicated a jackpot win of 1 million British pounds. That's about $1.22 million. She was so shocked that at first, she was terrified that it was all a dream for days. But finally, she had to accept it. She was a millionaire at the age of just 21. She knew exactly what that meant. She immediately hopped on a plane for a luxury holiday in Spain. Only her timing was a disaster. She was supposed to be in court testifying against a man accused of assault. It was a pretty important trial, and her testimony was a pretty big part of the case. Even worse, when she was informed of the court date, she'd told police that she was definitely available to testify on that day. She later said that when she told them that, she'd actually forgotten about a family holiday that had been booked months in advance. But some people doubted her story. Anyway, it didn't matter in the end. Not appearing at a trial is a crime. She was in contempt of court. When she got back to England, she was arrested at the airport and sentenced to 14 days in prison and ordered to pay a $250 fine. She says that they only arrested her because she'd won the lottery. I guess she thought they were jealous or trying to make an example of her. She was partly right. After all, they wouldn't want to let her off easy just because she was a millionaire. Then everyone would think they could get away with committing crimes. It turns out, having money doesn't give you the right to do anything you want. Leah had just turned 21 when she had her big win. That means she was technically an adult, but she sure didn't act like one. The next kid on her list was even younger than her, but his decisions were just as bad. Number 4. Jonathan J. Vargas. Back in 2008, Jonathan J. Vargas was just 19 years old. He had finished school and had got himself a job as a construction worker. It wasn't bringing in a lot of cash, and he was still living at home with his mom, his 2 sisters, and 2 brothers. The household was pretty crowded, and they would all have appreciated a little more cash. One day, while at work, something unusual happened. Jay looked down at the expiration date on a bottle of juice he was drinking and noticed that it matched his birthday. Suddenly, Jay had an idea. He immediately started writing down the ages of all his siblings on a napkin, followed by his mom's age to get 5 numbers. Obviously, for a Powerball ticket, you need 6 numbers. So Jay guessed the last one, deciding on the number 30. He had such a good feeling about it that he called his mom and told her to write down the numbers too, just in case he lost his napkin. As soon as he got off work, he ran to the nearest store to buy his ticket. On May 17th, he was glued to the TV, waiting to see which numbers would be drawn. Sure enough, one by one, all his numbers came up. He was the only winner of a whopping $35.3 million jackpot. At his press conference, he sounded surprisingly mature for such a young man. He told everyone he wanted to buy his mom a house. quit his job, and set up trusts to fund the education of his younger siblings. Lucky for him, his aunt was an accountant, so that worked out nicely. The only problem was, he didn't stick to his plan. After he decided to buy a mansion for himself, his spending spiraled. But then came the worst decision he made as a rich person. He poured all his money into a TV show. That could have been a great idea if it had been good, but it wasn't. His idea was an all-female wrestling show combined with dry comedy that Jay hosted himself. He called it Wrestlelicious Takedown. The reviews were awful. It turns out barely dressed women wrestling wasn't enough to keep an audience watching. The show was canceled after 13 episodes, and rumors of a second season turned out to be false. Jay's money disappeared with the show, and he's basically been hiding from the media ever since. He really paid the price for one bad idea. Number 3. Jane Park. Jane Park was earning just $9 an hour at an office job back in 2013. It was her birthday and she decided she'd treat herself to her first ever lottery ticket. Incredibly, even though it was her first ever lottery ticket, it hit the jackpot. She won the equivalent of $1.3 million thanks to the Euro Millions lottery, and she was only 17 years old. Unfortunately, instead of using it to follow her dreams, she just spent it. She started with a Louis Vuitton handbag and continued with luxury cars, holidays, and even plastic surgery. It didn't take long before her crazy lifestyle stopped being fun. She said she began to feel depressed and very lonely. Luckily, she had loving parents who cared about her. She was able to move back in with her mom, and that gave her the time to get her life back on track. And that wasn't the only way her mom helped her. She had cleverly made sure to put some of Jane's winnings into a savings account and didn't take no for an answer. That meant that even though Jane blew all her cash, she still had some of her millions left for her future. She owes her mom big time. Now that she's older, she campaigns to get the minimum legal age for playing the lottery in the UK changed to 18. The current legal age is only 16. She says that at 17 years old, she was just too young to handle the money responsibly. It looks like she was right about that. But the next kid on our list was over 18, and he didn't handle his money much better. Number 2. Michael Carroll. At the tender age of just 19, British teen Michael Carroll won the lottery. He collected the $14 million check with a police ankle bracelet still around his leg. It wasn't a good omen for what was going to come next. He spent wildly. One of his biggest purchases was a mansion he didn't like. He then spent even more on fixing it up. But he also worked out one of the best ways ever to lose huge tons of cash. He built a demolition derby racetrack in the back garden where he'd destroy luxury cars for fun. He couldn't have lost money faster if he'd flushed it down the toilet. He was starting the day with cocaine and vodka for breakfast, which might explain his bad decision-making. It also explains why he spent millions on sex parties in the mansion, even though he had a wife and child. Soon, his family and friends had left him because he was behaving so badly. Luckily for him, when he went broke, his wife decided to take pity on him. He'd got a job in a cookie factory in Scotland, and she took him back. That's a surprisingly happy ending, considering he said he'd be dead by now if he still had the money. Michael Carroll almost destroyed his whole life, but the last winner on our list was 3 years younger than he was when she hit the jackpot. How did she handle it? Number 1. Callie Rogers. Back in 2003, Callie Rogers was living in foster care and working at a supermarket. She was living in England with foster parents. She was doing her best, working at a supermarket checkout to make her own money. But it wasn't a lot. She was only earning $4.70 per hour. She had no idea she was about to make headlines as the world's youngest ever lottery winner. She was only 16 at the time, but she now had 1.9 million British pounds. That's only a little less than $2.5 million. The British teen totally changed her life with that money, but sadly, not in a good way. The first thing she did as a millionaire was quit her job. Then she bought a house for $236,000 so she could move out of her foster home. Then she met Nicky Lawson. He was going to become the father of 2 of her children. But before that, their relationship was pretty destructive. Some sources say that during their time together, they spent over $300,000 on cocaine. Around this time, she decided to get in contact with her biological parents. She immediately started buying them luxurious gifts, hoping to win them over. It seems like she decided to start buying things for people to keep them in her life. She reportedly spent a shocking $650,000 on gifts, almost a quarter of all her winnings. She was hoping it would help her make friends, but tragically, it was having the opposite effect. She often thought she was buying drinks for her friends, but she'd find out later that they were only talking to her because they were hoping she'd tell them a story that they could sell to the tabloid news. Her self-esteem dropped dramatically. That led her to spend tons of cash on plastic surgery in the hopes of feeling a little better about herself. But it didn't help. Her mental health was so bad that her children were taken away. You'll be pleased to hear it was only temporary. She got them back and she started to change her life. She met a fireman called Paul and they fell in love. They even had another child together. Sadly, their son Blake was born with cerebral palsy. Callie says she wishes now more than ever that she'd never spent her lottery winnings so she could use it to buy all the things her son needs. But she still says she's much happier now that she's broke again. Today, she still campaigns publicly to try to change the minimum age for lottery players, saying she wasn't old enough to be able to handle the responsibility. Obviously, being too young when you hit the jackpot can lead to pretty terrible things. But you don't have to be a child for the lottery to ruin your life. These people thought they had the perfect relationship until they won the lottery. It turns out, sometimes you don't know people like you think you do. Check it out.